Good evening, everyone. Hello there. My name is Batetshi. I'm a clinical psychologist, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us this evening to our talk on Revive and Thrive, Overcoming Burnout and Reclaiming Your Well-Being. We will be joined by our very special guest, Lungile Lechesa, who's going to be talking about stress and burnout, as well as other concepts that are related to burnout or stress, because I think that we can all agree that we're all tired. It's that time of the year, and I thought that it's an apt time to have this conversation. So thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to a very rich discussion with Lungile. And this will be our second last conversation for the year, actually. We have our last On Being Human conversation in November, the first week of November. And we're really looking forward to today. I know I have not been around for some time. I took a long needed break from the conversations, but we are back and we will be continuing. So I'm very, very pleased that you're all here. And I really look forward to conversations around mental health, mental wellness, emotional wellness, any topic that you would like. And once again, please do share topics that you would like me to talk about. Whether you email me or you can DM us on Instagram, or you can send me a message and just let me know what you would like to hear from our conversations, because the idea around these conversations is to really just deconstruct mental health and mental wellness and make it as accessible as possible to as many people who need it. All right, so yes, I did introduce the title of our talk today. So we do have Mrs. Lungile Lechesa, who is a clinical psychologist as well, based in Johannesburg, in Sandton. She is in private practice, and I'm really excited for this conversation because Lungile actually has a background in corporate. She was, if I'm not mistaken, she was in management consulting at some point before she transitioned into being a clinical psychologist. So I think she's the absolute right person to take us through what burnout is, what it looks like, how it impacts us, mind, body, and spirit, and just give us tools and strategies on how to really take care of ourselves. It is the last quarter, and I think that we are just all hanging in there for the next, 10, 12 weeks, if you may, of hard work. So really, I'd like to welcome Lungile Lechesa, who will be with us this evening. Hi, Lungile.
Hi,
Welcome.
Batetshi.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I booked this months back. So I'm really grateful that you could make it to our On Being Human conversations. And I look forward to our discussion for today. We will start just now and then end at 7:30, just so our viewers at home and our listeners at home are aware. And we will also have a Q&A session towards the end at about 20 past, but let's see how we go. But before we get into it, let me maybe hand it over to you, Lungile, and you tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? And yeah, let the audience know who you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I am definitely looking forward to this evening.
Yes, we are very excited to have you. Yes, yes. So you're a clinical psychologist.
Yes, so I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm based in Sandton. And as you are correct, I have I had a long career in corporate. And, thinking back, burnout was probably the thing that actually pushed me out and gave me the courage to go and pursue this career as a clinical psychologist.
Sure. And how many years were you in corporate? What type of sort of setting was
Sure.
it? What work?
I started on a graduate program at one of the big banks. I was in corporate for just under 10 years. So from banking, I then moved into management consulting, so from high pressure environment to high pressure environment, it was not me.
Mm, mm.
Mm, mm.
And I think that that's so it links so well with our conversation today, when we think about burnout and what causes burnout and
Absolutely.
stress, etc. So
Mm.
perhaps let's get into it, and you tell
Sure.
us, what is burnout, and how does burnout? What's the difference between burnout and stress? How can one differentiate the two?
Right. So burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion that is caused by prolonged stress. It's, a result of chronic stress, being overworked, and not taking care of yourself. And it tends to occur a lot when you feel overwhelmed, you're emotionally drained, and you're unable to meet constant demands. But the key thing here is that it's normally linked to work. But then, of course, it will spill over into all the other areas of your life. So as
Mm,
the stress continues, you begin to lose interest and motivation in your life and responsibilities. Burnout also reduces productivity, it saps your energy. You're left feeling increasingly helpless, hopeless, cynical, and resentful. And at some point, you feel like you've got nothing left to give.
mm, mm,
Yeah,
mm.
yeah.
Sure. And so all of these, I mean, you've named quite a few. You gave quite a few examples around burnout and how its root, first of all,
Yes,
and then
yes.
how it impacts mind, body, and soul. And you mentioned that it's mostly linked to occupational stress.
100%.
Okay,
100%.
can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit more about that? Why? Yeah.
About the stress.
Yes, and why is it that it's linked to the workplace?
Right, right. So work is a huge percentage of our lives, right? So if you find yourself in an environment where you're constantly under pressure, you are stressed, there's a high workload, there's an excessive number of tasks and responsibilities, but you don't have the adequate resources, you don't have support or time, you are constantly stressed, right?
Mm,
Um, More often than not, you feel like you've lost control. So you feel powerless or you've got limited control over work. And then of course it spills over into your home and personal environment. You feel like you're losing control over your entire life.
mm,
So these high pressure environments tend to cause a lot of stress and anxiety, but because it's a constant exposure to that environment, it then results in burnout. So to answer your initial question, stress is more brief and short term, whereas burnout is chronic exposure to chronic and prolonged stress. So
I see.
some of the other causes of burnout is being a perfectionist, right? So being unable to ask for help, being a type A personality, things can only be done your way, you struggle to delegate. So now you're just creating a lot more work and stress for yourself. But also a certain personality type where you have a general pessimistic view of the world and yourself and your life. Lack of recognition. So you're in a work environment where you are doing your best, you are, you know, the A performer, but you are not recognized and you're not acknowledged. At some point, you start feeling resentful. You feel, unappreciated. You start to feel less motivated.
Mm,
And
mm,
more
mm,
often than not, a poor work-life balance. So if all you're doing is working, you don't have time for important relationships in your life, you don't have time for self-care, you don't have time for rest, you don't even take sick leave, you're forced to go to work when you're sick, you're more likely to end up with burnout.
mm.
Mm.
I mean, I find that fascinating because you mentioned earlier on that the difference between burnout and stress, or how stress sort of slips, then tips over into being burnout, right? Because we are so, I mean, the lives we lead are just so busy and hectic. Um, I think we may have lost Lungile. I suspect it's load shedding. Uh, her power went off. So if you could bear with us for a few minutes while we sort it out, I would really appreciate that. Just say stay tuned, and I'll be back in 10 seconds, just to make sure. interruption. There's been difficulties with her electricity. Just as I was speaking about how hectic our lives are, that just had to happen. Just a prime example of some of the things that stress us and can cause burnout constantly, having to manage our load shedding schedules, trying to work around load shedding schedules is also a contributing factor, especially after the years that we've had. We've had really a hard 3 years, and something like this can really be stressful for a lot of people. But while we wait for Lungile to come back on, I'll just speak on, one of the points that she raised before the break was how, that there's this point at which we sort of tip over into burnout, and she was speaking about stress. And I was just thinking that the lives that we lead, they're so stressful, and we're constantly sort of on all the time, this on culture. We are overstretched emotionally. We don't have capacity mentally. We really stretch ourselves. And while there is healthy stress, I think that what Lungile is speaking about when it comes to burnout is when we are now experiencing more of the unhealthy stress as opposed to the healthy stress, because stress can be useful at times, but when we are constantly stressed and our certain hormones are constantly high, like your cortisol, that's when there's a lot of dysregulation, and then that's when it becomes very harmful, because those sort of hormones are not meant to be high at all times. So I just thought I could just share that, because the question that I often get is, so how do I know then that I am experiencing unhealthy stress, and how do I then know that I'm experiencing burnout? And as Lungile said before the break, burnout affects your mind, body, and spirit. She spoke earlier on about the point at which you start being very pessimistic or quite cynical, when you're more of an optimistic person. That should often tell you that something is off. Something is off in terms of your mind, because that's when your mind is really taxed, and it feels like it can't go on anymore. And on an emotional level, it is, it can be that very low mood. You're feeling quite low or depressed. You're no longer your high performing self. Physically, you're no longer a high performer. You kind of just give what you give, and you don't really care about the output. And at times, actually, because you're in that state and you're so exhausted, that's when, sort of behaviors that are unusual start creeping in. And this includes malpractice for some people. When you start engaging in unethical sort of conduct, that's often also a sign that I'm not myself here. What is going on? So those are just sort of some of the, just expanding on some of the examples that Lungile gave before the break. But we do have Lungile back. So hi, Lungile. Sorry about that interruption.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Yes. Just one of our
burnout.
Yes, one of our stressors I had just explained. But Lungile, let's pick up the conversation, and let's speak maybe a little bit about burnout in different professions, right? Burnout can also present in particular professions. So maybe let's speak a little bit about which of these, which professions are more susceptible to burnout.
Absolutely. So some professions require a lot more emotional labor than others. And if we think about what burnout is, being the constant exposure to stress and high pressure environments, distressing environments, we can certainly pick those professions that are more likely to have people that end up with burnout, mainly being doctors and nurses. And this is largely due to the demands of patient care, doing your best but still losing patients, having to deal with patients' families, um, difficult patients as well, while trying to take care of the patient, but also managing your own emotions, and maybe even some patients who kind of remind you of your own personal traumas. So you're constantly stressed, they work long hours, also depending on the environment, particularly our doctors and nurses that work in government where there's lack of resources, lack of support, long hours. They generally do have burnout and also compassion fatigue. Um, and then you also have social workers in this pool also, and psychologists also, where they deal with painful realities, people and children, and this can easily spill over into your personal life. So now, where you start having difficulty drawing boundaries between work and your personal life, you're constantly switched on, you're constantly stressed. Then there's teachers and school principals, particularly in government. They're dealing with difficulties, lack of resources, poor working conditions, lack of support. And meanwhile, their job is actually very important because they're shaping our future leaders. So it's a quite a stressful environment to be in. Then you have lawyers. I mean, we
Mm.
all know how I'm sure we've all heard stories of what happens in the law firms, the high pressure, toxic culture, the always stressed. You always have to be available. You have to meet your client's demands. So if you
Mm.
have a difficult client, you're probably working all the time.
Mm.
Um, along with lawyers is other high pressure corporate settings like in finance, banking, accounting industries. They're always switched on. Large transactions, you cannot make a mistake. You have to meet client needs. There's very little time for you. And then we've got our police officers, very, very stressful work environments, high risk. You don't know whether you're going to go to work and come back. So you're constantly anxious, you're constantly stressed.
Mm.
So these are just to name some of the professions that people are more likely to end up having burnout.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mention all these other professions, right, in corporate sort of settings, as I was doing my research and just in my work, my clinical work, is that one sort of profession that I think is under researched or underrepresented in research as well is business owners, entrepreneurs. Uh,
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. When you look at the literature, actually, you see just how much business owners are at high risk,
Mm,
high risk
mm,
for burnout,
mm, mm,
high risk for a variety of mental illnesses.
mm,
I'm
mm,
very passionate about entrepreneurs
mm,
and entrepreneurship,
mm,
and that's been my research as well. Is that
mm,
entrepreneurs are really struggling. There's a mental health crisis in entrepreneurs.
mm,
And this is your business. You're a business owner. First of all, you're trying to start a business
mm,
in this economic climate. We
mm,
all know how tough it is, and
mm.
also just trying to grow your business. And we're
Yeah.
having to manage, issues like load shedding. My goodness, at the backdrop of COVID,
Mm,
when
mm,
some
mm,
people completely lost their
mm,
businesses,
mm.
and they're trying to come out of that. It's mentally taxing to be
Absolutely.
a CEO, be the finance person, the HR person, the technical person, because when you start a business, those are all the hats that you have to wear. So I certainly
Absolutely.
agree with you, and this just also came to mind around the careers or professionals that are more likely to burn out.
Mm, mm.
And I mean, this is not necessarily I suppose, a career per se, but it's a category of people. The literature as well, when I was doing my research, it was also saying that young professionals are
Yes.
at risk. I don't know if
Yes.
you've seen that across all of that.
Yes. And, I often say to the young professionals that I work with, I wish if I could go back
mm,
and redo the graduate program, I wish somebody would have taught me boundaries. Because,
mm,
you're fresh out of school, you want to do well, you want, your career to flourish, but then you do it at the risk of your mental health. There are no boundaries. You are that one where the boss knows that, from Monday to Monday, you are available. If something
mm,
needs to be done Saturday, Sunday, you are available. So with the young professionals, the biggest mistake is having that lack of boundary setting, where you
mm,
can still do good work, but it cannot be at the expense of your personal time, your weekends, your leave, your
mm,
mental health, your relationships. It's the
mm,
quickest way to burn out.
sure. And it's also, I think, a lot of it is influenced by our culture, right? Is
Absolutely.
that we almost revel in this sense of I'm busy and you're always on, you're
Mm,
accessible all the time, and you have to
mm,
look busy. People have to see that you're productive, and that people actually have a very complicated relationship with rest and setting
absolutely.
boundaries.
Mm, mm, mm,
All right. And then, Lungile, tell me
mm.
about, or tell us about the relationship between burnout and some other mental health conditions like depression, like anxiety.
Right. So this one, what I found very interesting while doing my research is that there's such a huge overlap, but burnout is not really yet recognized as something that you can diagnose on its own, like depression or anxiety. But they're definitely similar. They have the same symptoms, such as loss of interest in previous activities, prolonged fatigue, you isolate yourself, you withdraw, lack of sleep or change in sleep, and change in appetite. What we do know is that if you are depressed, you are more likely to end up with burnout. But the bigger thing to keep in mind here is that burnout can actually lead to depression.
Mm,
So with anxiety, I mean, it goes without saying that if you're constantly stressed, you're constantly switched on, you will be anxious. You're anxious. Did the email sound right? Am I going to meet the deadline? What will my boss think? Did I do
mm,
this? Did I do that? You're constantly on edge. But I
mm,
would really encourage, if you find that you are struggling with the symptoms that I've mentioned and you're not sure whether it's burnout or depression, think about what are the symptoms linked to, because depression is not necessarily linked to work. So depression can be linked to other aspects of your life, or maybe you just don't know why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. Whereas what will make burnout very clear is that the feelings are linked to work.
mm,
Mm.
mm, mm. So the symptoms are related to the work that you do,
Yes.
uh, and
Yes.
it's in a way or no longer maybe revitalizing you.
Yes, yes, you're withdrawn, you've lost interest, you've checked out, but you still show up and you try and push through.
Mm,
But
mm,
remember that the feelings of hopelessness, of fatigue, being withdrawn and isolating, it won't just be limited to the work environment. It will spill over into your life,
mm, your personal life.
your personal life. So your friends and family are not seeing you. You are no longer engaging in activities that you previously enjoyed. You're not sleeping. There's a change in appetite, and so on and so forth.
Mm, mm, okay. And Lungile, what is the impact of burnout on our physical health?
So this one is actually quite scary, because I think we tend
Mm,
to forget that stress can make us sick, right? So if we think about what burnout is, it's continuous exposure to prolonged stress. So we
mm,
know that it affects and weakens the immune system. Um, so burnout can result in frequent minor illnesses such as colds and flus, But the scary thing is that it's also been found to be a predictor to more serious diseases, such as coronary heart diseases, headaches, respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular disorders, so things that affect your heart rate and your blood pressure, changes in pain experience, prolonged fatigue, stomach issues, type 1
Mm.
diabetes, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and even mortality under the age of 45.
Hmm. Sure, that's scary.
It's very
That's
scary.
really scary.
Yeah,
Hmm. I mean, and I think we forget, right? We forget that there's that mind-body connection. That
absolutely.
when your mind is not where it needs to be, it will trigger a physical reaction.
Absolutely.
And I suppose also, we see it in our clinical work where some people manifest their stress or
Mm,
their mental pain through their bodies. And so it sort of also makes sense why burnout would trigger those sort of autoimmune diseases, because that's what you're mentioning. Rheumatoid
yes,
arthritis is an
yes.
autoimmune disease,
It's
right?
autoimmune. Yes, yes. So,
Yeah.
I was at a very interesting talk over the weekend, and the psychiatrist said something that I had never thought of, where she said you've heard of heart transplants, you've heard of liver, kidney transplants, but no one has actually ever heard of a brain transplant. There's no such thing.
Mm,
So if your mind and your brain is not well, it will trigger other things in the body, because that's where life starts and ends, right? Our brain is responsible for all the other organs operating the way that they're supposed to operate, the nervous system and all of that. So you have to take care of your mind in order for your physical health and your body to be well.
Hi, Lungile. I think we had another disruption there.
Oh, I
Um,
could still hear you and see you.
oh, really? Okay, I couldn't hear you, but you were just speaking about the workshop you attended over the weekend. That there is
Yes.
no sort of brain transplant, such a thing as that. Mm,
No, no. For your body to operate the way that it's supposed to operate, it all begins in the mind, right? The nerves, the neurons, the everything. It begins with the mind. So if you don't take
mm,
care of your mind, then of course it will spill over onto the rest of your body, whether it presents as diabetes or as lupus or as whatever the case may be. But, the other organs, you can transplant them, but you cannot transplant the brain. So we really, really have to take care of our minds. Healthy
mm,
body starts with a healthy mind.
mm, mm, mm. But Lungile, we grew up with, well, particularly I know in my family, we grew up with our parents, our mothers, our brothers, fathers, where issues such as cholesterol, diabetes, they were so common. Arthritis,
Mm,
they were so
mm.
common, and I never linked it to stress or burnout or your mind. And I wonder whether there's a correlation there around why certain demographics present with certain illnesses.
I definitely think that there's a link, because if you think about, the older generation, not only were they trying to raise their children, provide the stuff that parents do, they were also trying
Mm,
to survive. So
mm,
it was a lot. You're trying to survive, to stay alive, to not be thrown in prison, at the same
mm,
time provide for your family, be present for your family, for your spouse, still show up at work, and
mm,
as women, it becomes a little bit more difficult, because then
mm,
we're expected to also perform at the same level as our male counterparts, but we also have responsibilities outside of work.
mm, mm. Yeah, you were speaking actually about the gender aspect of burnout and
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
it can impact some genders more than others.
Yes.
Can you maybe
Yes.
say a little bit more about that?
So it research shows that women report, and I'm going to emphasize the word report, burnout
Mm,
more than men. But I think it does link back to, the fact that we have dual responsibilities, maybe not even dual, more than dual responsibilities, where you have to show up at work, and then you're the wife, and then you're the mother. So you've got so many roles and responsibilities, but we don't get the same recognition. So remember, if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, burnout
mm,
can be caused by you're working so much, you're putting so much effort, but there's a lack of recognition and appreciation. And we know that women are not paid the same as men. So, in
mm,
as much as we're expected to perform at the same level at work, chances are your male colleague is getting paid and being recognized more than you are. You constantly have to up your game to work twice as hard just to be seen at the same level, and you're not rewarded for it. And then you come home. Now you must be a present mom, be a present wife. So it places a lot of demand on a lot of women.
mm, mm.
Mm,
Sure.
mm.
And technology, Lungile,
Sure.
what are your thoughts on the link between or the role of technology in burnout?
Terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Especially during and post COVID, because now your boss knows that you're always available, right?
Mm,
So
mm,
with the introduction of smartphones, where back in the day you could send me an SMS and you don't know whether I have received it or not. Now with
mm,
WhatsApp, you can see the ticks, you can see the two ticks, you can see the blue ticks. There's pressure to respond. So there's pressure to always be switched on. Your email is now on your phone. You can't go on holiday and disconnect from work, unless you remove mail from your phone or whatever the case may be. But it does become very difficult to have a separation between work and your personal life, because you're always accessible.
mm,
You are working all the time. I mean, I have young professionals who will wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, to respond to an email that they got just before midnight, and they thought, oh, let me just catch a nap so that this thing can be in my boss's inbox before 6 a.m.
mm,
It's Technology is great, but it does come with very negative consequences for our mental health. And also
mm,
with social media, like you said, the pressure to keep up, to be seen, achieving, doing the most, that also impacts on how much pressure you put on yourself, and how much work you take on, and how many projects and how many businesses and things you take on just to be seen to be doing well. It's a lot of pressure.
mm, mm, mm.
Mm.
Yeah. And I suppose it's also because it's a yes culture, right? That you're almost revered when you do
Yeah.
more things than you possibly can actually
Yeah.
bear mentally. And I think that it's very uncommon or unheard of people saying, actually I'm stretched, I don't have capacity. I think that most people look at you and be like, what are you on
Yeah.
about?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
this pressure to actually say yes as well to
Yeah.
opportunities, right? To
Yes.
constantly,
Yes.
when something comes up, then you feel like, oh no, I must do it. You raise your hand.
Mm,
Spoke
mm,
earlier
mm,
on around the personality types that are
mm,
more susceptible to
mm,
burnout. And it is,
mm,
high achievers, people who are driven by performance, who are high
mm,
achievers, and they always
mm.
feel like I can do it, so let me do it.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
not? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a colleague of mine who wrote a book. Her name is Kathy Mann, and she was a business owner. She was a director. She a mother, wife, ultra marathon runner. And and she wrote a book on burnout and how her life collapsed, and it
Mm,
took her
mm.
many years to recover
Sure.
from burnout. And she could actually, from the last time I spoke to her, she didn't ever return to the high performance um,
Mm.
that she was at because of burnout. She developed an autoimmune illness,
Oh.
and she couldn't function after that.
Mm.
And she completely had to rewire her life.
Mm.
But it's the seriousness of burnout and
Mm.
how you can work for corporates. You can work, whether it's running your business for 40 years and you want to retire, but
Yeah.
you are unwell. You're
Yeah.
unwell and you can't enjoy it.
Yeah.
And then it's what's the point?
I, and I think the to what you're saying, a lot of people don't realize that it's not an overnight thing where suddenly you've got burnout. It's such a gradual
Mm,
process. So it's important to always check in with yourself and see, how am I doing? How am I feeling? Am I doing too much? Do I need to take a break? Because
mm,
it won't hit you overnight.
mm,
Mm.
mm. And the one thing that also stands out, right, which I found quite interesting in when we talk about burnout, is that burnout also happens when we spoke about this, where there isn't enough replenishment. There's
Yeah.
depletion, constant depletion, but there isn't enough replenishment. So
Yeah.
when there's that imbalance of depletion and replenishment, that's when you slip into burnout.
Mm.
But the one other interesting fact about it is that I found interesting was that also being in the wrong profession and being in the wrong career can actually lead to burnout, and
Mm.
that for me is mind blowing actually.
Mm. 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 Absolutely. So remember, stress is more physical, if we can call it that, right? So it's, you're anxious, your heart is racing, I need to get this. Whereas burnout goes beyond just the physical aspects. It goes into the emotional stuff, which is there, where we start feeling withdrawn, feeling hopeless and helpless. So I can't imagine being in a work environment where it's high pressure, but also you hate what you're doing.
Mm,
That's a double blow on how you feel, on your lack of motivation, feeling like you have to drag yourself out of bed for 5 days
mm,
a week. It's a lot. It's a lot.
mm,
Mm.
mm. And I remember in our conversation, you and even at the start of this conversation, you mentioned that burnout was the reason you changed careers.
Yeah. 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 I had gotten to the point where I just couldn't. And like I was saying to you, when I realized that it was time, I couldn't. I would literally wake up in the morning, get ready for work, drive all the way to the client in Pretoria, but I would be in tears. The
Mm,
whole drive would be in tears. I park at work, fix myself, pull myself towards myself, push through the day. But the moment I get back in the car, I would cry the whole way home. I was depleted. I didn't have energy. I got home, didn't want to talk to my husband, it was just a lot. It was too
mm,
much. And I realized that, nope, something has got to give and it can't be me.
mm,
Mm.
mm, mm, mm. Sure. And it's such a it's a very and it's hard to explain that state, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
hard to put
Yeah.
a word or a name to that
Yeah.
state. It's just like
Yeah.
you're sort of this sense of emptiness, or
Yeah.
you're just going through the motions,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your mind, you've almost left your body.
Absolutely. And you're right, it is hard to explain, because I remember trying to explain to somebody who was asking me, about my pivot, my career pivot.
Mm,
And she said to me, well, you were doing well. So I imagine that at least you were crying in a nice car. And I was like, but it wasn't even about crying in a nice car. Because it takes so much from you, that even the material things, the things that you always thought you wanted to achieve, the life that you had visualized for yourself, suddenly it's there, but you cannot connect with it. It doesn't
mm,
feel fulfilling. If anything, it just takes away from you. And the people around you, of course, are not going to understand that. What do you mean you want to quit your job to become a full-time student, sell your car and downgrade your life? What do you mean? But it's
mm,
only when you have hit that point where you're just like, mm-mm, something has got to give, and
mm,
it cannot be me. Yeah.
mm, mm. That it came too high a cost for you to
Yes.
continue.
Yes. Yes. I couldn't.
Mm.
Mm.
And Lungile, so how can one prevent burnout? What strategies can the audience out there use to
Mhm.
prevent burnout and manage burnout?
So the first thing that I want to really emphasize is being able to set boundaries, right? You cannot always be available for work. You need to learn how to say no. I've got too much on my plate, or just manage it in a way that work knows that you're only available between 8 and 5. Some people like to push it to 7 p.m., but nothing beyond that. So taking care of yourself, of your personal time, selfishly guarding your personal time is very important, because that's where you get rest. That's where you get sleep. And rest can look like
Mm,
Netflix and chill, right? Rest can look like a dinner with your friends where you
mm,
are replenished. You're
mm,
connecting to the important relationships in your life. You are guarding your mental health, working out. I think we really underestimate the
mm,
importance of the food that we eat. We live in a very fast-paced culture. Everything is like microwave. But we've lost, the essentials of eating healthy. It matters what you eat, right? So I would encourage you to go and do your research around foods that help with your mental health and your physical health. You'd be
mm.
surprised at what fast food, the wrong carbs. I'm not a dietitian, so I'm just going to throw things out, but I know that sugar, fast foods, and high fat and all these things actually have a very negative impact on our mental health. So diet and exercise is very important, because then you stay energized, right? So I've mentioned sleep, boundaries, taking care of your physical health, mental health, and investing in a good support structure. That looks like good relationships, right? Whether it's work friends where you can complain about work together, but most importantly, relationships outside of work. Who is your support structure? What does it look like? When you are stretched, who do you call? When you need, I don't know, a day out, who do you do that with? When you need to cry, who do you call? It's very important to have a strong community of people that you trust, people that you can be vulnerable with around you.
Mm, mm, mm. And I think that that's so important, that it has to be relationships that are actual support systems,
Yes,
because I
that
think
don't take away from you.
exactly that you need to be very clear about who those
Yeah.
people are. And Lungile, I really liked what you mentioned earlier on about rest and the different kinds of rest.
Yeah.
That your responsibility is to explore what replenishes you, right?
Yes.
um,
Yes.
and and that will look different in different seasons,
Mm,
and that you have to see what really fills your cup, right? What do you need? What do you need right now? Do you need
mm,
the kind of rest where you're Netflixing and chilling, or do you
mm,
need to be away from responsibilities? Like literally, I'm not doing anything. I'm taking a break from responsibilities. Do you need to be away from your digital devices?
mm,
Do you
mm,
take a
mm,
detox and say,
mm,
I'm actually for a month, I am not going on social media. And one other, point that I really liked earlier on that you spoke about is boundaries. And I think that we also often think that boundaries are in relation to the other, right?
mm.
But boundaries can also be with self. They actually start with
Absolutely.
self, right?
Absolutely.
So putting in strategies like I am not going to have email on my personal phone. That's a boundary that you're setting
Yeah.
for yourself. That I am going to, I don't know, I'll only have wine on Friday and Saturday and not on Wednesday. That's a
Yeah.
boundary that you're setting for yourself. And I think that it's so important to emphasize how one should start with self.
Mm,
And that's really, where your responsibility lies
mm,
is
mm,
exploring your mind,
mm.
um, knowing what your mind needs and how your mind works, so that you can communicate it to self and to communicate it to others.
Absolutely.
And Lungile, I mean, when you spoke about the connection between burnout and physical illnesses, I also thought about what we often come across in our clinical work, that a lot of people, I think that the difficulty with linking certain illnesses to self is because you don't really believe that you will be susceptible to it. And we know that there is such a thing as being genetically predisposed to
Mhm,
certain conditions. So can we maybe
mhm,
speak about just genetic predisposition, and then
mhm.
why we keep saying take care of your mental health before take care of your physical health as well?
Absolutely. So to your point, so if let's say you have a close relative, and by close, we could extend it to your grandparents or your grandparents' siblings, where there's a mental illness in the family. It could be addiction, it could be depression, it could be bipolar, it could be anything. That makes you genetically predisposed, right?
Mm,
So you could live your life not having this gene wake up, but
mm,
so you wouldn't even know that it's there. But sometimes what happens is that it is sleeping, but then it takes an event to wake it up. So if
mm,
granddad had bipolar, that does not necessarily mean that you will have bipolar, but perhaps you will have depression or anxiety. But it took a certain event to trigger this gene and to wake it up. So
mm,
I would encourage you to, speak to your parents, speak to your aunts, your uncles, and just kind of find out, what's happening in the family, what illnesses. It's the same as cancer and diabetes. So it won't be different for our mental health. So take interest and know what is in your bloodline so that
mm,
you're able to take care of yourself and to prevent genes from waking up as I explain it.
mm.
Mm.
Sure. It's that analogy. I mean, I know it's quite a strong analogy, that genetics load the gun,
Yes.
but your
Yes, yes.
lifestyle triggers the gun, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And I
Mm.
think that also for people to understand that it's not normal to have five aunties that have diabetes. It's not normal to have five uncles that have high blood
Mm,
pressure, or
mm, mm,
these sort of lifestyle
mm,
diseases
mm,
that we've
mm.
kind of in a way normalized. We say,
Yeah.
oh no, high blood pressure, diabetes, it's normal. It's actually not normal. It's a
Yeah.
result of an autoimmune illness.
Mm.
Well, it's possible, and it could be linked to your mental health.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important that we have these conversations. But let's maybe take questions, Lungile.
Sure.
Let's see if we have any questions from the audience, and let's try and answer them. Let's see if there's anything that's going to come up. But maybe in the meantime, Lungile, do you want to maybe share a little bit about where you are based, just so people, in case they want to reach out to you, they can find you?
So I am based in Sandton in Morningside, at Sandton Central Square. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me. I'm on Instagram. I am also, if you Google, you'll find my website where you'll find my email address and my cell phone number. You can easily just contact me through that way.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I have not seen any questions come up here. I don't know if our audience is happy with what we've shared today, but I really do want to thank you, Lungile, once again for taking time out and having these conversations, and really just being a mental health advocate, because I do know that you do a lot of talks around mental health, and just making mental health accessible and destigmatizing mental health, especially in our African communities. So I'm really grateful that you made time to chat to us today.
Thank you for
Any
having me.
final thoughts? Yes, any final thoughts?
Take care of yourself. If you start feeling off, you're not sure what's happening, you're not feeling like yourself. A lot of people come in and they say, I don't feel like myself. Seek help. If the people in your life are saying, oh, you're being irritable, or you're being different, or you're being something, pay attention to the feedback that you're getting and seek help.
Thank you. Thanks, Lungile. We haven't had questions, just a few comments made. I saw a comment saying, thank you for the beautiful conversation earlier on, ladies. So again, powerful and significant conversation. Thank you for sharing. Sinenhlanhla, thank you for that. And actually, just having said that, it is Mental Health Awareness Month in South Africa.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So we will be continuing these conversations. On my page, we will be actually dedicating this month to the mental health of men, because I do think that it's an underrepresented aspect of our work. And please do stay tuned for further updates around what we will be sharing about in the next couple of weeks. Again, thank you once again for joining, and I will see you all on the first week of November for our final installment on Being Human Conversations. All right. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Bye-bye. Oh, as the question just popped in. Oh, does burnout have a time frame? I will try to answer that just in the last few seconds. Did you hear the question? Does burnout have a time frame? Vitumela is asking.
Right. So, like we said earlier, it's a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight. So you will start feeling the symptoms gradually. But in terms of a time frame, I often say, however long it takes to recover is however long you are consistent and intentional and dedicated to the process of recovery. So don't try and push through. So when you realize that, oh, I'm burnt out, don't try and push through and think, it will wear off. It won't. If anything, you're just causing more damage physically and emotionally. So I would encourage you to take as much time as you need. Your body will let you know when you are fully recovered. Your mind will let you know, because all of us are wired differently. So flu for me may not look like flu for you. It could take 3 days for you to recover. It could take 4 days for me to recover, but also that's obviously dependent on how well and how much you're taking care of yourself and putting into the process of recovery.
All right, thank you. Vitumela got in right before we ended. Thank you so much for your generosity, Lungile. All right, now I think this is our final goodbye. All right then, bye-bye.